Hello, comrades. Welcome back to Commie Reading Group. Today we'll be continuing Socialist Reconstruction. We left off on towards a third Reconstruction. So let's begin. The premise of this book is that socialism will replace capitalism in the United States. In fact, the United States of America, perhaps the most capitalist of all the capitalist countries, is ideally suited for the application of socialist economic methods and principles. But how will the socialist reconstruction begin? We don't know. We aren't fortune tellers. What we do know is that the revolutions happen, even in the United States. There are moments in history when people rise up against their governments and take power into their own hands. We can distinguish between political and social revolutions. In political revolutions, governmental power is transferred from one group of people to another. Social revolutions are more profound, changing the fundamental class relations in a society. The English Revolution of 1640 to 1660 and the French Revolution of 1789 overturned the serfdom of a feudal society. The Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804 abolished slavery. Enslaved people seized and held power, liberating their country from its colonial subjugation to the French ruling class. In the 20th century, the Russian, Chinese, and Cuban revolutions overturned the existing social class power. The capitalists and big landowners lost control over the factories and the land. The peasants received the land, and the factories were turned into a public property. Production was oriented away from private profit and towards economic development for public benefit. The American Revolution was a political revolution, not a social revolution. The enslaved people, who constituted the most important part of the working class in 1776, were still enslaved in 1783. Plantation owners retained control over their lands and their enslaved workforce at the end of the Revolutionary War. Some historians argue that the American Revolution was really waged to prevent the abolition of slavery in the 13 colonies because Britain was embarked on a path of abolishing this evil institution. Hello, Pookiekins. Welcome in. I haven't seen you in a long time. How you doing? The U.S. Civil War was more like a real revolution, a social revolution, than the 1776 revolution. The decisive military factor leading to the defeat of the Confederacy was the belated Emancipation Proclamation, signed by President Abraham Lincoln in January 1863, and the subsequent flood of 200,000. Is that thousand or million? 200,000. I'm terrible with numbers. I'm sorry, comrades. Free black people into the Northern Army and Navy. The North finally won when the conflict began an armed revolutionary struggle of the black working class in the southern states. Formerly enslaved people became free people. recognized as citizens with formal rights associated with citizenship and no longer the property of others. Oh, well, I hope. I'm sorry things are rough, but I'm glad you're doing better. I'm glad you're back. The Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1876, was an attempt to complete the social revolution that ended slavery. But it was defeated by the forces of counter revolution. During Reconstruction, formerly enslaved black people were promised land, resources, and political empowerment. None of that would have compensated for 250 years of unpaid labor, but even these promises were broken and drowned in blood. Reconstruction governments in the southern states were initiated by targeted by terrorist violence from the Ku Klux Klan, which had been organized by the defeated slave-owning capitalists. By 1876, different factions of the warring capitalists from the South and the North overcame their differences, reunited, and re-empowered the class of former slave owners at the expense of the rights and aspirations of the formerly enslaved black people. This was the counter-revolution that made Jim Crow apartheid the law of the land. In the 1950s and 1960s, many in the civil rights movement saw their new movement as the Second Reconstruction. The political and social achievements of that movement certainly helped reshape the U.S. Nevertheless, the civil rights movement did not alter the basic class structures in society. It ended apartheid laws, but the predominantly white capitalist ruling class retained control over the banks, corporations, land, and media. Factories belong to the capitalists, not to the workers who perform the labor that allows the factories to produce products. Social revolution remains on the historical agenda. The unfulfilled promises of the first and second reconstructions are glaring and present in injustice in contemporary society. Throughout U.S. history, it has been the struggle of the African American people that has been a catalyst for mass movements, radical upheavals, and the expansion of core democratic rights for women, workers, the elderly, and the poor from all sectors of U.S. society. The Third Reconstruction is premised on socialist control and redistribution of the vast wealth and resources created by the labor of the multinational, multiracial, and multi-ethnic U.S. working class. Central to its success will be overcoming the centuries of the super exploitation and oppression of the black working class. The immense fortunes of the capitalist banks and corporations were cemented by the enslavement of a huge part of the U.S. working class and the imposition of a centuries-long system of legal and extra-legal apartheid and enforced segregation. The first Reconstruction promised 40 acres of farmland and a meal to those who had labored but have never been paid. That promise was broken. The Second Reconstruction made only a political promise of equality under the law. The Third Reconstruction, because it will be socialistly because it will be socialist reconstruction, will finally guarantee both the full economic and political rights for all, with a focus on redressing and overcoming the centuries of super oppression imposed on black Americans. Revolutions don't happen simply because the prevailing system is unjust. They don't occur because society is divided between a minority of elites and a majority of whose suffering is getting worse by the day. Revolutions happen when society enters into multiple, cascading, cascading and overlapping crises that the existing power structure is unable or unwilling to solve. Faced with a ruling class unable to continue in the old way, a significant part of the population enters into active politics. The intervention of the people led, leads to sudden shifts in mass consciousness. Parts of the population that were previously apolitical and even conservative enter the fray on the side of progress. State sponsored repression fails to break them. On the contrary, it makes them more determined and less afraid. The people feel their power, taking the world stage to create a new society. We are entering a stage in the historical process that will lead to a revolutionary transformation. The last 4 decades of generally unchecked capitalist expansion have produced a set of systematic existential crises. Pending climate change catastrophe, great power conflict, and the likelihood of major war, and massive automation and job destruction. The U.S. capitalist ruling class and the political system that keeps it in power are unable and unwilling to address the cascading failures, rupturing society and threatening the planet. We don't know exactly how this revolutionary transformation will be set in motion. We can't predict which series of events will become the tipping point. Mass evictions and homelessness, widespread uprisings against police murder, increasing numbers of infractions in a deadly pandemic, food shortages due to drought, fires, and floods, or frequent and ongoing power and internet outages, can all ignite the fire of revolution. What we do know is that we might seem unlikely and to some impossible will appear inevitable. This book sets out a vision for society after the revolution. Socialist Reconstruction will solve the problems capitalism creates, ending production for the sake of private property and replacing it with production based on meeting the needs of people and the planet. Reversing climate damage and moving to a zero carbon emission economy will proceed at full speed. Redressing centuries of exploitation and oppression will establish an enduring basis for liberation and equality. Revoking the imperialist policies through which the U.S. dominates, destroys, and de-develops countries all over the world will bring an end, finally, to war and threats of war. We don't know exactly when revolution will erupt, but we do know that a socialist system has to be ensured and when it does, because only through socialism will people and the planet flourish. The socialist government, the form and function of a new democracy. Yo, what's up, Gwendolyn? How you doing? Oh yeah, you're doing good. Great to see you. We have reached chapter 2, by the way. A foundational step in the socialist reconstruction of the United States is the creation of a new constitution. This new constitution will differ profoundly from that of the current capitalist state. Socialism revolutionizes the form and function of government, making it truly democratic for the first time. Socialism revolutionizes the form of government because political powers is in the hands of the working class. For the first 87 years of the United States' existence as an independent nation, the slave-owning class dominated governmental power. After 1865, industrial capitalists and Wall Street bankers held it. With the Socialist Revolution, the working class will control the government and the state. For the first time, majority rule will not be a deceptive slogan masking domination by a clique of capitalist exploiters. Majority rule will be real. Socialism revolutionizes the function of government because government's purpose is no longer the provision of private property and minority power. The central functions of socialist government are 1. Meeting the needs of people and the planet. 2. Reorganizing the economy to end exploitation in all its forms. The exact opposite of the capitalist or bourgeoisie government. These two functions of socialist government are deeply interconnected. Meeting the needs of people and the planet and ending exploitation in all its forms require ending reliance on fossil fuels, wage slavery, and market domination. They require as well, most importantly, the full political participation of all of society in the management of common affairs. Fulfilling these two core functions thus necessitates a change in a form of government. A society of producers requires a form of political association through which everyone participates. Under capitalism, the productive process involves all of society. But decision making is controlled by a tiny layer of owners and their political operatives. For a new society, just the production is social. So government is also be social. So must government also be social. A matter of the combined efforts of everyone. The affairs of society are too important to be delegated to professional politicians and career specialists and administrators. Specialists and administrators, sorry. Accordingly, under the socialist form of government, all positions of political and judicial authority will be based on the elective principle and subject to immediate recall. Holding elective office in any legislative body will not be a full-time job. Professional politicians will be dissolved as a category. Legislators at the federal, state, and local level will earn their primary income from their regular jobs. Lifetime judicial appointments will be abolished. Government officials and civil servants at the federal, regional, and municipal levels will be paid the equivalent of the average salary of a skilled worker. Serving in electoral office will be carried out by those who are willing to embrace additional responsibilities. Holding office in an elected position will not be a perk or privilege, but rather an expression of sacrifice for the greater good. Socialist democracy, unlike the current Republican form of government, will not reduce the role of the citizenry to voting every 2 or 4 years for politicians who will supposedly represent them. On the contrary, people will be empowered and integrated into the management of the day-to-day affairs of society. Constitutional and legal recognition of voluntary mass organizations such as units, tenant organizations, cooperatives, and youth groups is the form of its empowerment. This empowerment. Building from the form and function of a socialist government, this chapter draws out the limits built into the current form of government in the U.S. We show how those limits protect the rich and prevent anything close to a real democracy. This chapter also points to fundamental changes that socialist government can and will bring about to guarantee a better future for all, especially for all who have been historically exploited and oppressed and are entitled to reparations, respect, and a role in shaping their workplaces and communities in all of our common world. The first step after a successful working class revolution will be the drafting and adaptation of a new constitution. Every major revolution in history has produced a new constitution to reflect the aspirations and gains of the revolution. The successful revolution of the working class in the United States will be no different, producing a constitution to ensure the expanding rights of all the people. Whether grassroots political forms are utilized for the drafting, debating, and adopting the new constitution, whether it be via constitutional conventions or popular constitute assemblies, this process will unleash the collective creativity of the diverse, multinational working class, and will be far more democratic and participatory than our current system. 37 million people in the United States lived below the official poverty line in 2020, which is itself a ridiculous and inaccurate way to gauge actual poverty. By official measures, someone who made more than $12,760 was considered not in poverty. And I'm sorry. I'm just terrible at numbers. A more accurate figure that is 50% of the population live either in poverty or near poverty. But not one member of Congress or the judiciary fits into this category. With the working class, the present democracy is completely hollow. By contrast, working class, low income, and poor people will be guaranteed representation in all the bodies convened for the purpose of drafting and adapting the new constitution, as will young people and communities long denied a voice in the political system. A new role of government. People in the United States are told that they live in the world's greatest democracy. Many believe it. At the same time, they constantly tell pollsters and each other that they actually despise the government. The approval rating for Congress hasn't hit 30% in more than a decade. Disapproval of the job Congress is doing normally hovers around the 80% mark. This is the state of the legislative branch created by the U.S. Constitution and often held up a model for democracy. To get a sense of the revolutionary change in the form of democracy that socialist government brings about, it helps to contrast it with the core functions of a capitalist government. The U.S. Constitution establishes the basic form and functions of the U.S. government. Adopted in 1787, the Constitution was amended in 1791 to include the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. These rights constrain governmental authority and guarantee certain liberties to the people. Later amendments abolished slavery, except for prisoners, gave women the right to vote, and expand other democratic rights. At the time Constitution was adopted, most of the population was prohibited from holding office or even voting. Only white men who owned property could vote until 1828, 41 years after the adoption of the Constitution. 12 of the first 15 presidents owned slaves. Enslaved people, adults, and children alike, worked the plantations, making the men who became president rich, well-connected, and politically powerful. The U.S. Constitution sets out a system of government with three branches: the legislative, executive, and judiciary. The legislative branch consists of the two houses of Congress, and the Senate and the House of Representatives. The executive branch consists of the president and vice president. The judiciary consists of the Supreme Court and underlying inferior courts. This system upholds the premise of private property for those who own capital, regulates commercial trade between the states, and gives Congress the authority to tax the people and to raise an army. Most important is what the Constitution does not do. It does not create any social or economic obligations of the government to the people or to society. The federal government can regulate interstate trade, impose taxes, raise an army, and declare war against other nations, but it does not direct, guide, or manage the economy. This means that the Constitution levels such fundamental matters as food, health, and housing up to the market, that is to say, in the hands of the class of property owners, capitalists, financiers, and landlords. A socialist government plays a fundamental different role in society. Recognizing that the collective and social nature of production means that workers should collectively manage society, the Socialist Constitution established a new form of political association. It does so by fulfilling the government's obligation to meet basic needs and by securing mass participation in governance, the economy, and other vital areas of social life. The class character of the socialist government. The current U.S. government conceals its bourgeois class character under deceptive labels and its self-branding as a government, of, by, and for the people. The new socialist government will openly proclaim that it is a workers' government. All legislative bodies and all governmental agencies and institutions will exercise the political supremacy of the working class for the benefit of the people and the planet. Vladimir Lenin highlighted the class oppression at the heart of bourgeoisie democracy. With the term dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, but calling it a dictatorship, he drew attention to the way that the government was designed to serve the interest of a numerically tiny exploiting minority class. From the legislative through the executive to the courts, every institution of bourgeoisie democracy protects the capitalist system and the capitalist class. The capitalist's central need is to exploit human labor and the earth's resources in order to accumulate profit. In fact, the exploitation of human labor and nature are the two component sources of capitalist profits. At federal, state, and municipal levels, the current system of government treats exploitation as capital's inviolable right. In contrast, the socialist government will eliminate the power of big capital and its regime of exploitation by putting under the people's control all the big corporations and productive enterprises. The 500 biggest companies currently constitute 2/3 of the country's gross domestic product. While expanding rights to free speech, to assemble to redress grievances, and to practice the religion of the one's choosing, the Socialist Constitution will prohibit political parties from advocating for a return to a system based on economic exploitation. Just as serfdom and slavery were banned in earlier epochs, so will socialist reconstruction prevent the return of capitalist rule. Overturning the rule of capitalism will likely include converting many small enterprises and incorporates into cooperatives. It will not require the nationalization of very small firms and businesses that employ a handful of workers. A national unitary system based on mass participation. The new socialist government will transform the words a government of, by, and for the people, for a meaningless plateaued into an opportunal reality. Rather than ceding authority to professional politicians, technical experts, and specialists, it will draw a large part of the population into the affairs of the state and society. At the same time, it will embrace central planning, eliminate market tyranny and wage slavery, and redress centuries of historical wrongs. Centralism will be combined with a widening and expansive grassroots democracy. The masses of people who have been sidelined and excluded will be brought into the governmental apparatus and decision-making process. Centralism and grassroots democracy might seem to be polar opposites, but both are needed if we are to produce the goods and services society requires on an environmentally sustainable basis. Welcome in, Man Trash. I hope you're having a great day. The point of a socialist government is to serve society, to serve the people. But socialist government will not be a system of handouts. It won't treat people as passive recipients of benefits and entitlements. On the contrary, it will actively integrate people into all the affairs of state. People collectively will engage in meeting the multiple challenges facing contemporary society. Given the looming climate catastrophe, the foremost task before us is the wholesale reconstruction of industrial and agricultural production, housing, transportation, and work. The new socialist government will address the challenge of climate change by democrati- democrat- democratizing society and democratizing society by addressing climate change. The essential challenges confronting contemporary society cannot be met piecemeal. They demand centralized economic and social planning on a national scale. The application of the very latest scientific and technological advances, and the mobilization and interrogation of millions of people into the active management of society. Although socialist society does not cede authority to technical experts and specialists, it values their knowledge, putting it to work in coordination with large scale, voluntary mass organizations. The new constitution will mandate that the actions of government agencies be coordinated with mass organizations of labor, women, youth, and others rooted in workplaces, neighborhoods, and schools. These national mass organizations will be designed to serve the people and interrogate their members as active participants in political and social life. Most specifically, the socialist form of government will combine a unitary, centralized national state empowered to act decisively and with direct purpose over the entire territory of the country, with voluntarily mass organizations designed to actively involve tens of millions of citizens. This national unitary state will replace the current fragmented federalist system. The socialist government will have the same power to act in all parts of the country with respect to matters that are vital to the collective. These matters include environmental protection, public health policy, and the guarantees of social and economic rights. No state will be able to deny any person their basic rights or undermine vitally important national initiatives, such as those addressing climate change. Let's see, we got like 20 minutes. I think we can get another section in. Gotta make sure I always stretch, you know? The problems with federalism. It is worth delving It is worth dwelling on the reasons for replacing a federal system of government with a centralist one. The so-called founding fathers were a tiny handful of capitalists and landowners who created a form of government that secured their narrow and so-called inalienable inalienable rights to secure and profit for their private ownership of land, enslaved people, and commercial capitalist enterprises. Oh, thank you. I think you're cute too, man trash. The federal system that design makes it impossible for us to deal with the existential crises we face today. A looming global climate catastrophe that threatens the existence of humans and other living things. This system even prevents us from responding to extreme weather events and rising sea levels that are happening right now. A wildfire that starts in rising sea levels that are happening right now. Wait, what? Did I miss them? Okay, I guess I didn't. A wildfire that starts in California can make it hard to breathe in Oregon and Nevada. Smoke and salt don't take state boundaries in account. Michigan approved a nuclear power plant on the shores of Lake Superior. If this plant built by capitalists, prioritizing the money in their pockets, melts down the released radioactive waste can contaminate the Great Lakes, with which contains 25% of the planet's fresh water supply. The catastrophic impact extends far beyond the boundaries of Michigan. The federal system also backs this kind of collective and public-minded action necessity for necessary for confronting pandemics. COVID 19 is the latest, but certainly not the last pandemic. As the whole world knows, COVID 19 casualties in the United States are the highest in the world. Each state and even different cities and towns in a given state, adopted its own rules, regulations, and health policy protocols in response to a virus that infects you whether you live in Texas, New York, or anywhere else in the country. The federal system wastes state resources, which are produced through the labor of working people. It uses them ineffectively and at a counter purpose to the conceding multiple crises. Most of us think people in the United States are sharing the same set of constitutionally guaranteed rights. The problem with the federal system is that it creates a patchwork of rights. The state you live in has a big impact on the rights you have. A woman living in New York State can schedule an abortion anytime during her pregnancy at any one of hundreds of medical facilities. As of early 2022, a woman living in Texas has just 6 weeks after conception to schedule an abortion. And women don't know they're pregnant for months. And many women don't know they're pregnant for months. Although the laws are changing rapidly as Republican legislators wage war on women's reproductive freedom in approximately 30 states, women must receive state-directed counseling designed to discourage abortion before their procedure. 26 states require an additional waiting period before the procedure, typically 24 hours, which requires a second trip to the facility. To top off this nightmare, in June 2022, the unelected U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, everscating abortion rights and freeing states to further their attacks on reproduction and sexual freedom. Workers' rights are another example of how the federal system is a weapon designed to limit democracy and democratic rights. If a worker gets laid off from their job in Montana, they can receive up to $552 as a weekly benefit and collect unemployment benefits for 28 weeks. But if a worker gets laid off in Florida, they can receive no more than $275 per week, and their benefits run out after just 12 weeks. Likewise, each state provides different benefits, requirements, and rights when it comes to health care access for low-income workers and their families. The Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, expanded allegedly for Medicaid. The government paid health care insurance available to very poor people. The expansion meant that people who made up to 138% of the federal poverty level could receive government paid health care services. In 2010, before Obamacare, the federal poverty level for a single person was defined as $10,830. This meant that if you made $11,000 per year, you weren't officially poor, and so too rich to qualify for Medicaid. I don't know if I'm saying those numbers right. I'm sorry. Obamacare tried to change that by expanding Medicaid, allegedly so that more people would qualify. Individuals with income up to 14,484 and families of four with income up to $29,776 would receive Medicare coverage would receive Medicaid coverage. But in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that states could opt out of the Medicaid expansion even though the federal government was paying 90% of any additional cost. 10 years later, and even while those states were being ravaged by COVID-19, there were still 12 state legislators that wouldn't permit the Medicaid expansion for the poor people in their states. Those 12 states are some of the biggest in the country: Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Three of the 12 are the second, third, and eighth most populous states in the country, with an aggregate population of over 60 million people. Texas, Florida, and Georgia are also the top three states of residence for black population in the United States, constituting nearly 25% of African American people. As devastating as the federalist system is for the social, economic, and political rights of hundreds of millions of people in the United States, it has also been a primary driver of the corporate capitalist destruction of the environment, population, and environmental racism. For example, on August 1st, 2020, a law took effect in Louisiana barring local elective governments from banning or interfering with natural gas utility services. At the time the law went into effect, no local city council or any other local governing body in Louisiana had ever taken such an action. Soon thereafter, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Arizona adopted similar measures. Why did these states pass these laws? Because capitalist oil and gas corporations exert a lot of power in those states. The capitalists were scared that they were risking losing profit. And why were they scared? Because the city council in Berkeley, California, had voted to make their city their first in the nation to ban natural gas hookups in new buildings. The Berkeley City Council knew that natural gas, especially methane, exerts potential heating effects in the atmosphere and has to be phased out in order to prevent catastrophic global heating. The capitalist fossil fuel corporations responded to the actions of one city council in a distant state by manipulating lawmakers in other states to pass laws expressly designed to prevent necessary action on climate change. The federal system benefits big oil and gas while harming people and the planet. The efforts of necessary actions taken by some local governments are canceled out by states that do the bidding of their fossil fuel overlords. This is a road to ruin. Ending the U.S. fossil fuels is the key to survival of human and other species. It requires urgent action. It also requires full spectrum planning so that the transfer to other energy sources can happen quickly and effectively. As we set out in Chapter 3, only nationwide planning and large scale reconstruction of the entire economic system can migrate the economic disruption energy conversation we will cause. This has far reaching consequences for supply chains, methods of production, and distribution, distribu- distribution of industrial products, industrial produced goods, agricultural production, travel in and between cities and towns, and myriad of other areas of economic and social life. Because the federal system prevents adequate, necessary, and centralized action, it has to be abolished and replaced. The supposed benefits of feudalism, local empowerment, and the protection of minority rights are a sham. In fact, can be more substantively fulfilled in a new socialist government, as we described below.